It was shortlisted for the 2007 Man Booker Prize and is the winner of the 2008 Commonwealth Writers' Prize, Best Book from Europe and South Asia. Sinha's narrator is a 19-year-old orphan of Kafpur, born a few days before the 1984 Bhopal disaster, whose spine has become so twisted that he must walk on all fours. Ever since he can remember, he has gone on all fours. Known to everyone simply as Animal, he rejects sympathy, spouts profanity and obsesses about sex. He lives with a crazy old French nun called Ma Francie, and his dog Hara. Also, he falls in love with a local musician's daughter, Nisha. The story was recorded in Hindi on a series of tapes by Animal himself, and it has been translated to English as well. The author uses Animal's odd mixture of Hindi, French and Indianized English such as compagnie, company, journalist, and jamasponding, spying, like James Bond. About the author. Indra Sinha, born 1950 in Colaba, Mumbai, Maharashtra, India, is a British writer of Indian and English descent. Animal's People, his most recent novel, was shortlisted for the 2007 Man Booker Prize and winner of the 2008 Commonwealth Writers' Prize for Europe and South Asia. In July 2015, Sinha was awarded an honorary doctorate in literature by the University of Brighton for his major contribution to literature and demonstrating the power of words in changing people's lives. The book is based on the Bhopal disaster. Bhopal gas tragedy was a chemical accident on the night of the 2nd to the 3rd of December 1984 at the Union Carbide India Limited (UCIL) pesticide plant in Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh, India. Considered the world's worst industrial disaster, over 500,000 people in the small towns around the plant were exposed to the highly toxic gas methyl isocyanate (MIC). Estimates vary on the death toll, with the official number of immediate deaths being 2,259. In 2008, the government of Madhya Pradesh paid compensation to the family members of 3,787 victims killed in the gas release, and to 574,366 injured victims. A government affidavit in 2006 stated that the leak caused 558,125 injuries, including 38,478 temporary partial injuries and approximately 3,900 severely and permanently disabling injuries. Others estimate that 8,000 died within 2 weeks, and another 8,000 or more have since died from gas-related diseases. The owner of the factory, UCIL, was majority owned by the Union Carbide Corporation (UCC) of the United States, with Indian government-controlled banks and the Indian public holding a 49.1% stake. In 1989, UCC paid $470 million, equivalent to $907 million in 2021, to settle litigation stemming from the disaster. In 1994, UCC sold its stake in UCIL to Eveready Industries India Limited (EIIL), which subsequently merged with McLeod Russell India Limited. Eveready ended cleanup on the site in 1998, when it terminated its 99-year lease and turned over control of the site to the state government of Madhya Pradesh. Dow Chemical Company purchased UCC in 2001, 17 years after the disaster. Civil and criminal cases filed in the United States against UCC and Warren Anderson, chief executive officer of the UCC at the time of the disaster, were dismissed and redirected to Indian courts on multiple occasions between 1986 and 2012, as the U.S. courts focused on UCIL being a standalone entity of India. Civil and criminal cases were also filed in the District Court of Bhopal, India, involving UCC, UCIL, and Anderson. 6-7 In June 2010, 7 Indian nationals who were UCIL employees in 1984, including the former UCIL chairman Keshub Mahindra, were convicted in Bhopal of causing death by negligence and sentenced to 2 years imprisonment and a fine of about $2,000 each, the maximum punishment allowed by Indian law. All were released on bail shortly after the verdict. An 8th former employee was also convicted, but died before the judgment was passed. Background of the novel. The title Animals People offers interesting insight into the novel, as it gives us a view of the way the people of Kafkor identified themselves. The chorus of the children copying Ellie, after stating she does not understand animals people, shows this unification of the people of Kafkor. We can hear the chorus of small voices gradually falling behind, "Hey animals." People. One unification of people usually takes place during a disaster, which occurs during and after the crisis in Kafkor. The title of the novel is used to help identify this unification of people and also to foreshadow the difficulty Ellie will face when trying to open the clinic. Ellie will have to try to break down the tough barriers which exist in Kafkor, to help the people move past what they fear the most, change. The comfort they seek is always being able to blame the company for what happened to them, and assuming every outsider is there because the company sent them. The relation to the title is that Animal is a prime example of the hatred, with his foul mouth and negative attitude towards everything. The title, Animals People, also refers to the difference in behaviors and attitudes between the citizens of Kafkor and the American doctor, Ellie. This becomes apparent on page 183 when Ellie is frustrated about everyone's attitude toward her clinic, and yells, "Hey animals people. I don't understand you." She came to Kafkor with only a mere idea of how the people had suffered. She knew that people were ill and her duty would be to nourish them back to health, but that was the extent of her connection to them. Due to her more fortunate circumstances, she could never fully grasp the trauma and the aftermath of the gas leak or the chronic poverty which plagued the city. Furthermore, she was oblivious to the reasons why the citizens were so untrustworthy toward outsiders. Without experiencing it for herself, Ellie the doctress was an outcast among the rest of the city of Kafkor, Animals People. Characters of the novel. Animal. Animal is the protagonist of this story. He is a victim of a chemical factory explosion caused by company and is depicted as a boy with a twisted spine that roams around Kafkor on both of his hands and feet like a dog. He constantly denies his humanity and claims that he is an animal. After this factory incident, Animal is put in an orphanage and taken care of by Ma Francie. He has no recollection of his parents. Animal openly displays his hatred toward humans, yet there is a side of him that yearns to be a human being. Therefore, when an American doctor comes to Kafkor, he regains his lost hope of being able to stand on his own 2 feet and dreams for that day to come. Although Animal initially loathes his inability to walk on 2 feet, in the end, he realizes that being a 4-foot is better off for him. By being a 4-foot, Animal avoids being one of the millions of upright humans and instead becomes the one and only animal. Samraj. Pandit Samraj Triambak Punakar is Nisha's father and a music teacher. He is described as tall, with a long and pointy nose, and long fingers. He also has a stoic nature, being called solemn and private by Animal. The most important fact about Samraj is that he used to be a famous singer, known throughout India, who was referred to as the voice of Kafkor. However, the night of the accident he lost his wife and baby son, in addition to his lungs being damaged by the chemicals. He no longer sings, and if he tries he has coughing fits. Ma Francie. Ma Francie is a nun from France who worked in the orphanage where Animal grew up. She acts as Animal's mother figure and can be described as kind, although mildly senile. Her affliction from the accident is her loss of understanding Hindi and English. She believes that everyone else is speaking gibberish and is unable to understand that they are using another language, not just making random sounds. She also sees prophetic angels as a result of her madness. However, she still does her duties of going from house to house, helping the sick and injured as best she can. Safar. Safar is Nisha's boyfriend. He is described as a man in his late 30s, tall, good-looking, thin with a jutting beard, curly black hair and glasses which makes him appear wise. Safar is an outsider who is so appalled by the company actions that he moves to Kafkor to advocate on their behalf. He sacrifices everything in his life, including his studies as a scholar for the poor and sick. He is a saint and hero to the citizens of Kafkor. Farouk. Farouk is Animal's friend and nemesis. Farouk's family came to Kafkor from Yar Yilikis. His intelligence is that of a criminal in a gang, like his two brothers, or a mechanic. He is Muslim, a movie expert, and Zafar's number 2 man. Nisha. Daughter of Samraj, girlfriend of Zafar, friend of Animal. Nisha sees Animal in the gutter and introduces him to Zafar. She is the object of his affection, yet sees him as a friend only. Ellie. American doctor who comes to Kopfer. She is frequently described as wearing blue jeans and is an object of lust for Animal and others in the town. Acting out of philanthropy, she struggles to find acceptance. Summary. Published in 2007, Animal's People by Indra Sinha was the 2008 winner of the Commonwealth Writers' Prize and was shortlisted for the 2007 Man Booker Prize. Based in the fictional town of Kafpur, which means, Village of Terror, it centers around the 1984 Bhopal industrial disaster and its aftereffects on the survivors. Told from the point of view of a 19-year-old Kafpuri boy who was disfigured, that night, the novel focuses on the West's dehumanization of the other, and on the greed and callousness of Western capitalism. It contrasts the invincibility of wealthy, well-connected corporations with the powerlessness of those they oppress and questions whether injustices against the vulnerable can be righted. Animal's loathing of hope. Though he yearns to walk upright so he can win the heart of his love interest, Nisha, he is terrified of disappointment, reflects the hopelessness felt by the people as they fight the powerful company that continues to exploit them. Transcribed from tapes, the tone of Animal's story is informal, honest, and sometimes brutal. This intimate first-person viewpoint ensures the reader sympathizes with the plight of Animal and, therefore, with the plight of his people. Animal was born a few days before, that night, the Bhopal industrial disaster, and left outside a doorway, where he was taken in by nuns. When he was 6 years old, he began experiencing excruciating pain that left his back twisted so he could no longer walk upright. Animal does not recall a time when he was human. Animal used to spend his time scavenging for food outside restaurants with his dog, Hara. One day, a teenage girl, Nisha, tells him she's seen him performing scams around the city and that he could do more with his life. She invites him to her house for lunch so Animal can meet her father, Samraj, a famous singer whose lungs were injured that night, and Nisha's boyfriend, Zafar, an activist who has dedicated his life to helping the poor. Zafar gives Animal a job listening around the city for signs of injustice. Animal begins falling in love with Nisha. During this time, Animal looks after Ma Francie, the nun who raised him and who since that night believes that she hears the voices of angels and demons. For 18 years, the American company, the company, responsible for that night, has refused to face the court or decontaminate their factory, which continues to make people sick with the chemicals that seep into the ground and water. The people are thrilled when, at a hearing, the judge says he will consider Zafar's request to compel the company to come to court. Zafar tells the people they will win. An American doctor named Ellie Barber buys the building across the street from Samraj and Nisha's house and builds a free clinic for those injured that night. Zafar believes the timing is too coincidental and that she must work for the company, which hopes to collect false information to show their chemicals are safe. As he gets to know Ellie, Animal becomes certain that she does not work for the company and that she genuinely wants to help. Meanwhile, Ma Francie believes that night, and the 9/11 attacks indicate the apocalypse is coming. Animal begins to feel resentful of Zafar, who is seen as a saint in Kafpur. He obtains pills that he can slip into Zafar's drink to lower his libido. Zafar calls for a boycott of the clinic because using the clinic would jeopardize their case against the company. Ellie believes Samraj to be behind the boycott and angrily confronts him. She also examines Animal's back and suggests she can help him, making Animal hopeful he can win Nisha's heart one day. Animal takes Ellie to visit the poor in his community. Ellie finds that the people desperately want her help but refuse to go to the clinic. She is frustrated that the people are so hard to help. The court petition is granted, and the company will be forced to attend a hearing. Ellie and Samraj begin to bond over music. Animal learns Ellie had been married to a lawyer but left him when it was clear they held different beliefs. Safar calls off the boycott and apologizes to Ellie after Ellie takes care of Samraj one night when he is ill. Animal continues to give Zafar Fakhri's pills. Nisha is sad when her father and Ellie become engaged and plan to take her to visit America after the hearing. The company lawyers arrive, and Zafar fears they will try to make a deal. After a violent protest at the chief minister's house, Animal overhears Ellie and one of the lawyers speaking intimately at the lawyer's hotel. When the lawyer kisses Ellie and tells her she can come home, Animal believes she has betrayed the people. He wrestles with his conscience over whether to tell Zafar, for he still hopes Ellie can fix his back. Zafar and Farouk go on hunger strike, foregoing even water. Ellie tries to dissuade them. Their condition deteriorates. Ellie announces that she's had word that the deal has been delayed, but Zafar and Farouk continue the hunger strike, unconvinced it isn't a trick. Animal confesses to Zafar his love for Nisha and how he poisoned him. Zafar tells him to look after Nisha if he dies. When the hearing is delayed, a violent protest at the factory breaks out. At the clinic, Animal confronts Ellie over what he heard at the hotel. Ellie tells her the lawyer is her ex-husband, and she asked him to delay the deal. He told her he would if she went back to America, and she agreed. Animal confesses his love to Nisha and asks her to marry him. When she rejects him, Animal runs out, devastated. He takes the remainder of Fakhri's pills and begins hallucinating. Protesters burn Ellie's clinic. Animal goes home to see Ma Francie before she dies. He hears cries that the factory is on fire, and he is overcome by burning gas. Ma believes the apocalypse has come. She says goodbye and leaves to help the people. Animal slinks into the forest to live as an animal, away from all people. After days of hallucinations, he sees images of his dead friends. He believes Zafar and Farouk to be dead and that the rest of the city died from the gases. He reflects on the poor conditions of Kafpour life. When he sees his friends coming toward him, he at first believes them all to be in the afterlife. Zafar tells him they stopped the hunger strike when the chief minister promised not to approve a deal without him. The minister planned to break the deal in secret, but a mysterious woman in a black burqa, presumably Ellie, released gases from the factory in the room, forcing the lawyers to cancel the deal. Ellie, Samraj, and Nisha go to America while her clinic is rebuilt. When they return, the two couples are married, delighting Animal. Animal receives word from Ellie that he can go to America for surgery to heal his back. He decides not to have the surgery, instead choosing to be his strong, unique self. Themes of the novel. Westernization. Westernization plays a key role throughout the novel, setting up key relations between characters, showing Sinha's view on Western influence, and giving a more accurate depiction of distant sufferers. This book is about a chemical disaster, caused by an American company, on Indian soil. Furthering this point, Sinha shows a complete refusal by the same company to accept any repercussions for their actions. The various examples of apprehension towards outsiders, the journalist, the leaders of the company Campani, and Ellie the doctress give insight into pre-existing blame-based relationships. These outsiders, associated with the company that neglected responsibility for making the people ill, are seen as tools to help mask and minimize the harm to Kafpour. Western materialism is objectified through Animal's eyes, with images like the Coca-Cola sign that is so commercialized that it transcends language barriers. Sinha alters facts from the real Bhopal disaster, including the name of the city, the company responsible, and names of individuals involved in the relief effort. This shows how he wished to make this story applicable to all Western-caused debacles. Identity. At the conclusion of Animal's people, Animal finally accepts who he is, Animal. We see this concept of self-acceptance as a major theme in this novel, as we see Animal transform through the sharing of his story. Throughout the novel, Animal struggles internally with who he is. Especially with his appearance as an animal rather than a human. However, after coming to terms with what has happened and the suffering he experienced as a consequence, Animal accepts who that has allowed him to become A person whose identity does not come from the events of the Kampani disaster, but rather a person whose identity comes from personal experiences and the people who surround him in his life. We know Animal has truly come to accept his new identity when he decisively says, "Stay 4 foot, I'm the one and only Animal." Narrative structure of the novel. The novel is told through Animal's tape recordings. The Kakadu journalist insists Animal tell his story. The tapes are recorded in Hindi by Animal and then translated into English by the journalist. Like with previous foreign journalists, Animal thinks that his story will be entangled with everyone else's in Kafpur. The stories of all survivors will be meshed together to form one tragic tale. To ensure this will not happen, Animal agrees to tell his story if only it will be told exactly how it is presented through his tapes. In Animal's second tape, he dwells on the audience and directly addresses the audience. In a letter to Animal, journalist states, "Animal, you must imagine that you are talking to just one person. Slowly that person will come to seem real to you. Imagine them to be a friend. You must trust them and open your heart to them. That person will not judge you badly whatever you say." Animal then talks to the reader and says, "You are reading my words, you are that person. I've no name for you so I will call you Eyes." Indra Sinha begins Animal's People with the editor's note. This story was recorded in Hindi on a series of tapes by a 19-year-old boy in the Indian city of Kafpur. True to the agreement between the boy and the journalist who befriended him, the story is told entirely in the boy's words as recorded on the tapes. Although this premise is entirely fictional, Sinha wanted to convey the story in a way that gave authority and a singular voice to the real, but little-known aftermath of a gas leak in India that is considered the world's worst industrial disaster, the Bhopal disaster. The recorded tapes are arranged in a largely linear manner that is interrupted with flashbacks that skip between the past and present. They impart the story gradually, developing the setting and characters of Animal's past while simultaneously incorporating ongoing events. Animal tells his story in the past tense, as he is repeating experiences to journalists via the tapes. The first and second tapes introduce Animal as the narrator and establish the audience as nothing more than disembodied eyes. In the middle of the second tape, Animal jumps back to when he was 6 years old and the pains of his apparent morph from human to animal that occurred as his spine twisted to the point where he had to walk on all fours. He then quickly fast-forwards in tape 3 to the meeting of present characters, Nisha and Zafar, then interjects a narration that describes the current appearance of the Kampani's factory. The story continues in this flitting manner to uncover the full depth of the situation through Animal's unexpectedly fierce and spirited narration, giving an unconventional take on the idea of distant sufferers. Writing style. Animal's People is primarily a first-person monologue in which the narrator Animal details past events of his life and his internal thoughts from that time to an audience whose existence he is aware of. On occasion the novel changes to a third-person narrative where Animal narrates another character's independent experiences, such as Ellie's interactions with her ex-husband in tape 20. In both cases, the story, though it occurred in the past, is presented in the present tense. Despite the fact that the novel details past events, Animal is not presented as an omniscient narrator. The reader is never informed beyond Animal himself, the character rather than the narrator in the context of the story. This, in addition to Sinha's use of present tense to describe past events, causes the reader to experience Animal's life in the form of direct speech alongside him while still allowing for commentary from a narrator who has already lived through these experiences, usually in the form of indirect speech. Thus, the reader is caused to identify more strongly with Animal's own thoughts, emotions, and desires as the story unfolds, something that falls in line with Indra Sinha's past career writing emotionally charged advertisements for charities such as Amnesty International. Influence of perspective. The story told by Indra Sinha in Animal's People is one that is obviously influenced by the Bhopal disaster from 1984, and the way Sinha wants the world to see the disaster. Sinha chose to write the story in a fictionalized setting so he could write freely, as opposed to the situation he already knew regarding Bhopal. 3. However, his goal was to instead tell the aftermath of the disaster, which he does through the lens of Animal. In Animal, the perspective of Sinha and many others still seeking reparations from the incident are channeled and reflected. Kafkori language. Indra Sinha's inclusion of words such as Kampani and Kafkor, Kaf, meaning terror, in Urdu 3 challenges readers' competency as linguists. Animal's language Kafkori requires readers to recognize phonetic similarities to English and etymological cues, e.g. Hindi, French, in order to ascribe meaning to the text. The inclusion of a Kafkori glossary in Animal's people substantiates the cultural richness of Animal and the Kafkori people while successfully reminding the reader of the otherness of Animal. Sinha's melding of linguistic traditions enhances the meaning of the text and artistic freedom of the author. Appearance. Animal's people's description of the Kampani disaster site is accurate to Union Carbide's actual abandoned factory. The novel depicts the factory as untouched and overgrown. So many years after the Bhopal disaster, the Kampani company has not returned to the scene and cleaned up the mess. Animal mentions the steps leading nowhere, and the abandoned tanks, cracked and still containing toxic chemicals. Trees and other vegetation have taken over the area, making it difficult to access and travel within. Indra Sinha's description is similar to the real factory in Bhopal, India. In 1996, tests were administered on the soil and water testing for toxic chemicals. Results came back positive. Water is still being contaminated. Through observation of pictures, tanks are left untouched, stairs leading to nothing substantial, rust covering everything, and trees and wild grass everywhere. Indra Sinha's Kampani and Animal's people has many similarities to the Union Carbide factory in Bhopal. Correspondence. Animal's people takes place in the town Kafpur and is based on Bhopal, India. It is the site of one of the world's worst industrial accidents. The first instance of court being brought up in the novel references a trial that is said to take place 18 years after the initial disaster. Safar tells how the Kampani refuses to recognize the court's decision to proceed with criminal charges against American executives in India. Finally, at the end of this first court date, they are able to get the court to review the assets of the Kampani in an effort to bring the people responsible to justice. The court case depicted in the novel is rooted in the reality of the criminal cases surrounding the Bhopal disaster. The Indian Supreme Court was quick to bring criminal charges against the CEO of Union Carbide, Warren Anderson. Following the disaster, Anderson traveled to India and was immediately placed under house arrest upon arrival. He left the country never to return. As part of a $470 million settlement reached in 1989, the criminal charges in the case were dismissed. Through petitions and protests, activists were able to restore the criminal charges against Anderson and 4 other Union Carbide employees in 1991. Despite this decision by Indian courts, warrants being issued, and requests for extradition, the CEO refused to appear in Indian court. Numerous trials were held that Union Carbide officials never acknowledged. In June 2012, a U.S. court ruled that neither Union Carbide nor their former CEO were liable for any of the charges brought against them. Dow Chemical, which bought Union Carbide, has repeatedly denied responsibility for the disaster or its repercussions, but in July 2013 Indian courts decided that Dow Chemical is still responsible to survivors of the almost 3 decades-old disaster. It is thought that 100,000 people are still suffering from the 1984 gas leak. Outside intervention. The Sambhavna Trust is an organization that was founded to bring aid to the victims of the Bhopal disaster. It set up various clinics throughout the affected area, none of which charged any fees for treatment. Each clinic was allopathic and served as a one-stop spot for treatment. In Animal's people, this was personified through Ellie. She was able to provide medical aid to people who came to her, and also placed focus on their mental health and well-being by befriending all her patients and counseling them on a more personal level so they could finally accept and understand their disorders. The Sambhavna Trust also emphasized mental health and recovery by providing yoga and massage sessions through its Ayurveda care department. This type of treatment is native to India and specific to the Hindu culture. Ellie made sure to medicate the whole person, not just their physical ailments. She befriended Animal and helped him through his internal struggle about the orientation of his body. At the end of the novel, Animal is very accepting of his new form, and it is all from Ellie and her unconditional support. The Sambhavna Trust did not come about until 1996, and the gas leak occurred in 1984. In those 12 years, the victims received care in hospital-based facilities, which were too expensive for a lot of those people. Even though the Indian government eventually decided to give free healthcare to the victims, their children were not covered, even though their health was also compromised. The majority of the outsiders' focus was going towards either research or compensation and recognition for the survivors, not their health. Because of this, nobody was sure how to react to the Sambhavna Trust clinics, and whether they were actually there to help. 8. In the book, Ellie was the first one to come in to help the victims. They were very wary of her at first, thinking that she was gathering statistics for Campani's research, since that is what they were used beforehand. Once her intentions were regarded as pure and earned the people's trust, they were more than willing to receive her help. According to the book bag, Sinha's book was shortlisted for the 2007 Man Booker Prize, described in The Independent as an extraordinary achievement, and by the Indian Express as a novel so honest it leaves you gasping for breath. Leslie Mason said in his review of Animals People, "This is a book that should be part of the national curriculum throughout the world." Not only does it explore the outfall of one particular humanitarian and ecological disaster and the pitiful response to it by those responsible, but takes in the wider picture of the general attitude of richer people to the poorer and that of the so-called developed nations to those who have yet to claim a share of the power and the glory or the muck and the money. 9. New York Times. Kafkaur is also the setting for his fiercely polemical, and unexpectedly bawdy, novel Animals People, a finalist for the 2007 Man Booker Prize that reveals not a paradise but a blighted city. Blog critics. Try to imagine for a moment what it must be like to be the people of Bhopal who have lived for 20+ years watching family and friends die, descend into madness or give birth to stillborn babies. Animals People, the latest offering from Indian author Indra Sinha, available from Simon & Schuster Canada, does just that. Washington Post. Washington Post said of Animals People, "The right writer has met the right tragedy." Barnes & Noble. Eric Banks of Barnes & Noble Review said, "It isn't hard to figure why it hooked critics. Sinha controls language so magnificently in this novel, he carves out his territory with a vengeance."